Morning, guys. Hey, Felix. Let me figure out how I can turn my camera off myself. Video. I can never find the same settings twice for some reason. Hide self view. There we go. Now I can see you guys. I don't want to look at myself. Morning.
Morning.
All right. Let's figure out what we're going to do today. Device audio output. Spencer's having some, he's got a question. Can anyone help him with that? You go to audio settings, Spencer. Okay, perfect. You guys are good. All right. So, quiz on curtain and light. Sorry, I forgot to post the lesson from last week. I did that this morning, so I apologize that wasn't up. There are still some that have to write it. A couple questions were, is there a due date on these quizzes? I have set a due date so it goes into your calendars. I didn't on this one. I'm not being a stickler on time, but I mean, we've only got a few weeks left, right? A week, depends how you count, but we have what, 3 weeks left after this one, so 4 including this one, so we're getting down to the end. So yeah, please write the quiz if you haven't. If you guys have any questions specifically on the quiz, please ask. I may not answer them in this forum because there's like half of you still have to write it. But if you've written the exam or the quiz and you have questions about it, or if you feel that you're not quite prepared and you have any questions, please ask. I'll be happy to go over that stuff with you, either on a private call or via email or whatever. Okay, so please do that. We have a few things left to cover in the course before it's finished. CO2 dosing and air circulation is one of them, and then we're going to get into irrigation and how to set watering crops and what influences affect irrigation starts. We'll look at that next week. I'd like to look at a little more on graphs and get you guys accustomed to looking at graphs and why the computer control program makes the decisions that it makes when it does. And then we'll get into the final exam, right? So yeah, we're almost done. I think you guys would be, as much as us, looking forward to the end, right? We're getting there. So yeah, hang in. Luckily, the weather isn't as nice as it was last week. A little chilly to keep you guys inside studying. So let's carry on, I guess. So yeah, CO2 control. I've got a little question up here, looking at the graph for carbon dioxide dosing throughout the greenhouse. This is a sample greenhouse because our greenhouse does not have sensors for CO2, nor do we have the capacity to dose if we wanted to. The greenhouses that dose are production greenhouses, right? So we're looking at vegetable production, we're looking at cannabis, we're looking at high production, high value crops that will dose their greenhouses with CO2. There's not a lot of ornamental greenhouses out there that will or have the capacity to dose carbon dioxide into the greenhouse. So what they would do is open their vents, right? So throughout the day, the plants would consume the carbon dioxide. Most plants, right? There are some plants that consume it at night rather than throughout the day. So as like in the wintertime, for instance, as the greenhouses are closed up, the sun is out, plants are photosynthesizing like crazy. You might notice your carbon dioxide levels fall. And at that point, what you can do is open vents. So if you had a sensor, you can attach your vents to your carbon dioxide levels. Open up the vents, and an influx of 400 parts per million of approximately 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide enters the greenhouse, which is usually sufficient for ornamental crops. We don't really need to get into high concentrations of carbon dioxide until you get into vegetable production or cannabis production. Plants where we want to push high levels of photosynthesis. So let's have a look at this little problem here, this little graph we've got going on here. Assuming that the crop is a vegetable crop, we'll call it a tomato crop. You can't really see what's going on down here, but we've got midnight on this side on the x-axis, and then we're back to midnight here. So it's a 24-hour period. Midday is right in the middle, right there. There's noon. Okay, so we look at our carbon dioxide levels and we dose. Can you guys have a look and kind of think about what's happening here? Just take a second and maybe think about it before we move on to discussing it. Someone's eating cereal. I can hear it. kind of cereal is it? No? Fruit Loops?
Oh shit! You can hear me? You've been cutting out the whole time. All I hear is cereal, and I was like, "Oh shit!"
I have been. I hear a ting ting on the bowl. Can you hear me now, Sav?
Yeah, I can hear you now. It's my internet. It's really just being dodgy. I'm trying to fix it right now.
All right, hopefully it's just yours.
Yeah, I'll turn my mic off.
Yeah,
It's Cheerios and Weetabix, by the way.
Cheerios and Weetabix. Awesome. All right, let's have a look at this graph. So we start dosing right around this level here, right? So this is sunrise. At sunrise, we start dosing. The red line is the equipment that's dosing. So it's either we're either using liquid CO2 or we're dosing straight from the boiler itself. So basically, it's kind of like irrigation, right? We'll have solenoid valves that will control the gas. Those solenoid valves will turn on based on our set points, right? So if the carbon dioxide levels are low and the sunlight is high, those are the triggers, right? So the concentration of carbon dioxide and the sunlight levels. So if the sunlight levels are a certain point, the carbon dioxide will turn on. So we're starting to dose at around 7 o'clock. So I would assume that's sunrise in this graph. And then there's a bunch of stuff going on, right? We're told that the vents open and the fans turn on at around 10 o'clock. So that's why we see a dip there, right? So maybe we want to turn the carbon dioxide dosing off when the vents open. Might be a good idea. Okay, so think about why we turn the carbon dioxide on and factors that might affect the concentration within the greenhouse. So throughout the day, the plants are consuming. Levels drop because of various things, like opening the vents, and the fans are on. But we'll say that the plants are consuming the carbon dioxide. We'll say that Graham, you're cutting out. Graham sounds like a demon right now. You got a question, Graham? Maybe type it in. Can't hear you. We follow the graph and we'll go to the end of the day. So sundown, right around where this red line drops, and you can see right away the carbon dioxide levels fall. So right around sundown, the plants are consuming carbon dioxide at a high rate, and it drops back down to ambient levels, which are, in this case, around 390 to 400 parts per million, right? So you can see that the plants will absorb a large amount of carbon dioxide in a short period. Sorry, there we go. So that's this graph. And here are a few questions based on that graph. Let's have a look at the set points and how to set it on the Priva operator, which is very similar to the Office Direct. So opening the Priva operator, you look at zones, CO2 dosing. So graphs, what are you going to see on the graph? You're going to see the rate of carbon dioxide in the greenhouse, what the sensors are telling you, and a state of your equipment, basically on or off. So the graphs aren't really, you can put sunlight on this graph, right? So you can track when the sun's up and the rate of, you can guess the rate of photosynthesis based on the sunlight and the carbon dioxide levels. So that's something you would look at on the graph. Your status. So you can see the trigger points here of what controls the carbon dioxide equipment. So your measured parts per million, measured carbon dioxide in parts per million is at 235. Our desire level is 1,000 parts per minute, and what the equipment is doing. Something else you might want on the status screen would be sunlight levels, right? Because your sunlight level will be another trigger point. So what time do you want to start the, so here's your settings, right? So here's your where you're going to set up your program for carbon dioxide dosing. What time you want it to start at, what time you want it to stop. So that doesn't really make sense right there, but anyway, you get the point, right? So the time to start, time to stop, sunrise to sundown, and the level of sunlight you want to start dosing at. Okay, so high sunlight intensity. So this is the set point of the light where the carbon dioxide dosing will be at 100% or the highest value, right? So high sun, high carbon dioxide levels, that type of deal, right? The more sunlight we have, the higher the rate of photosynthesis. So therefore, the higher the rate of consumption of CO2. I've just posted this PowerPoint. And in this PowerPoint, you can see there's graphs explaining that, right? So at high light levels, we have a greater rate of photosynthesis, therefore a greater rate of carbon dioxide consumption. Okay? So when we set our programs up in the greenhouse, we want to accommodate that, right? You don't want to dose too much carbon dioxide with not enough light, because then we're just wasting carbon dioxide, right? Which may not be an issue if you're just taking it off of the boiler, but if you are buying it in liquid form, then you're just wasting your money. So at lower sunlight levels, we have a lower desired carbon dioxide rate. Okay. So these two, so desired CO2 at high sunlight intensity, so that's 1,200 parts per million, corresponds with this number here, the high sunlight intensity. And the desired carbon dioxide level at low sun intensity corresponds with the low sunlight. Pretty straightforward. So the next is, rather than blowing all the carbon dioxide out the vents when we open the vents, we can decide to turn the carbon dioxide level or the equipment off, or lower that dosing set point. So this is saying cooling percentage to switch to cooling CO2. So what that means is how far do the vents open before we turn the carbon dioxide off? Right. So at 30%, is that too much? Probably, but whatever. We can set that to whatever you think would be proper. So different vent is going to have a different effect, right? So if we look at like a Venilo style vent that you'd see in a vegetable production greenhouse, where the vents are smaller and they're at the top. This 30% might be okay. But if you had a roof vent that opens fully at the peak, 30%, you're going to have a lot of airflow at that 30%. So maybe you want to switch that lower. Okay. And then the desired CO2 level when the vents are open. So again, ambient CO2 in the atmosphere is about 400 parts per million, and climbing, I guess. So you can set that below 400, and likely the equipment will turn off at that point. Right? So your vents open, an influx of fresh air will come into the greenhouse, therefore bringing ambient carbon dioxide levels into the greenhouse, which should be at around 400 parts per million. So if it's below that, our carbon dioxide dosing equipment should turn off. We're not wasting money of the vents. So carbon dioxide control is fairly simple, right? It's cause and effect. If this happens, then this turns on. It's pretty straightforward. Do you guys have any questions on that? Good. Sensors are usually found in those aspirated boxes or the bird boxes, aspirated screens around the greenhouse. And the way those work, those sensors have, they detect the refraction of light. Okay, so gases refract light differently. So the level of carbon dioxide that's within the atmosphere of the greenhouse affects how the light is refracted on the sensor. So light passes through the sensor, and it detects from there the level of CO2 in parts per million of the greenhouse atmosphere. And those sensors, like I said, are usually on the aspirated screens in the middle of the crop, which is important. You want those sensors to be around the middle of the crop. That's pretty much it for carbon dioxide. Things that I'll ask you to make sure you understand are the influences that are needed to start dosing in the greenhouse. I'm making assumptions that you guys have gone through what carbon dioxide is used for in the plants, and B, how carbon dioxide is dosed within the greenhouse. I think you've covered those. If you haven't, please ask some questions, and we'll clarify as a group.
Hi, Dan. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah.
So the influence would be the starting and stop time and sunlight intensity, right?
You got it. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple.
Okay.
Yep. There are custom programs that you can set up to influence that dosing as well, but very simple ones are sunlight and time.
Okay, and you maintain like same level of CO2 throughout the greenhouse, right?
Yeah, depending on the crops that you grow. I mean, 1,000 parts per million is pretty standard. Cam asked, would the concentration problematic for humans? So anything above 2,000 parts per million is going to start making you sleepy at a prolonged exposure. Anything over 5,000 parts per million is troublesome. You might have some issues there. So in a typical greenhouse, it would be rather difficult to get up that high because of the air exchange and the volume of air, but it is possible, I guess. In closed facilities like the cannabis bunker that we have, that can be problematic. They do have, I believe they do have the ability to dose CO2, but I don't think they do it because of the amount of people that are in there. Give sufficient amounts of CO2 levels for the crop. talking to the technician that works over there, Lori, she says that sometimes the carbon dioxide levels climb to 2,000 to 2,500 parts per million just with students. So you get 10 to 12 people in a confined area, the carbon dioxide levels shoot up pretty quickly. Pete asks, can you set the Previta run temperatures a bit higher? Yep, absolutely. That's a good question. Yeah, so photosynthesis relies on temperature, sunlight, right? So you can definitely do that. Whether it's going to be a custom control, so an if and then statement, right? So we can have a look at how to do it on the other ones. Let's see if I can figure it out on this one here. So if we're dosing, then we'll have temperatures at this set point type of deal. Actually, you probably do it on the temperature setting. Temperatures. Let's look at if there's any influences here. Okay, temperature influences as a liar out of myself. I don't see CO2 dosing. Do you? No. No. So we'll look at custom. So custom programs are basically using, you're programming a computer to you're customizing a computer program, right? You're using if and then statements. So if this happens, then we do this type of deal, right? So we have to say, use yes, we do. So climate custom conditions. So we're basically saying up top here, yes, we'll use the custom control from 7 in the morning until I don't know, 5 at night. Okay. So if at 7 in the morning, if measured CO2 is greater than so right here it says 2,000 parts per million. So we can say if measured CO2 is greater than, I don't know, 900. So here is the if statement. So if this is greater than this, then the custom override program right here. So you start here, here's the conditions. So if conditions, then we can have a minimum mixing valve, a minimum heating percentage. We can set, am I missing a temperature, heat stage, cooling stage? I don't see heating, but we can manipulate the heating by having minimum heating percentages. We can set that to whatever there, right? So we can increase the temperatures that way. Okay, so this is a climate custom program that we can adjust as a grower. So if you don't find something in the settings that you feel is a necessity, like this, like making sure that we have the right temperatures or heat in the greenhouse, we can set it up on a climate program or custom program. And there's lots of options that you can. So does that answer your question, Pete? That's heady. Any other questions on carbon dioxide dosing? You guys talk about heat storage and dosing carbon dioxide during the day, running the boilers during the day and storing heat. Have you guys talked about that in your technical, greenhouse technical course? Yes. Okay, so you guys understand that in order to dose throughout the day, if you're using carbon dioxide from a boiler, that you would have to run the boiler throughout the day and store the heat in heat storage tanks, so you can then run the heat at night. Okay, and that would be set up in your settings. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward on that. So we can move on from carbon dioxide. I have a PowerPoint that I posted, and that explains, you know, review from your environment class. So why plants, when plants use carbon dioxide, what it's important for, and all that fun stuff, right? The different levels of carbon dioxide throughout the years, sunlight, how it's relative to sunlight and photosynthesis, all that fun stuff. Okay. But my prime directive for this course is to teach you guys strategies on how to use it. We'll move on from there. You guys have that. So air circulation is something else that's in this unit. And again, this one is a simple one. Moving forward, I think I'm going to start with these ones: carbon dioxide and air circulation, lights, all the simple ones, so we can, you guys can start easy instead of getting into humidity and all the hard concepts. So air circulation, the fans come on based off of humidity. If the humidity reaches a certain point, the fans come on to circulate that the air. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So certain times throughout the day, we can program different levels of humidity for the fans to turn on. Okay, so start time for period 1, it looks like it's at 4 o'clock. Yeah, so this is determined by our climate strategy. So the ramp time is for heating and all that, not necessarily for the fans. But relative humidity set point is at 35%. So at 35%, fans will turn on. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward on that. Fans are also tied to the vents. So if the vents open, we want that air to flow up, especially for either one, for vertical airflow or horizontal airflow fans. We want to turn those fans off so that the air can get through the vent. Okay, so that's true if we're purging, because the purge uses the vent, and if we're dosing CO2. So yeah, fans are pretty straightforward as well. I mentioned this one was going to be a short lesson, so the fans are tied to humidity and the vents. That's pretty much it. Any questions on that? Yeah, I didn't think so. So other than that, I don't really have much.
With fans, is there sensors that'll signal the fans to say that there's like how well spread out heat is, or how well spread out the humidity is?
Yeah, good question. No, there's nothing specific tied to the fan. The more sensors we have in the greenhouse, the better control we'll have and the better understanding we'll have within the greenhouse, right? Um, Having sensors throughout the greenhouse will allow us to understand how that airflow is occurring and how consistent our temperatures are. Um, you think about our greenhouse and where the sensor is. It's only on one side of the greenhouse. It's on the north side. So is that temperature going to be the same on the where that sensor is compared to the middle of the zone on the other side, on the south side when the sun's out? Probably not, right? The air, even when the fans are on being circulated, we're going to have different pockets of temperature throughout the greenhouse. And as a grower, as you grow crops within the greenhouse for long periods of time, you'll understand where these pockets are, right? You know, our greenhouse, our I think zone 2 is probably the most consistent because it's surrounded by two larger zones, right? We have the third zone that's a high heated zone, and then there's the zone 5 and zone 1 where we have heat as well. So you think about the environment in zone 2, we're going to have pockets of warm through the middle of the greenhouse and on the sides where the heat is radiating through either zone. So we're relying on the fans and the direction of the fans, the way they're pointed, to circulate the air. Usually we'll have for our horizontal airflow fans, we'll have, depending on the size of your greenhouse, we'll have a fan pointed one way. So on the north side, we'll have the fan pointed south. And on the south side, we'll have the fan pointed north. So we'll have them crisscrossing, right? We have, that's only if there's two, but if we had four, then we'd have them crisscrossing throughout just to get that air circulation going from north to south. So is there sensors that are directly related to the fans? No, there's not. Okay. So long-winded answer to your question, Seth.
Fair enough.
Any other questions? Yeah, it is short and sweet. So a quiz on this will be a short quiz, and we'll look at triggers to turn the fans on, triggers to turn the CO2 on, and what influences affect those, right? That's what we'll talk about on the quiz. All right, so next week we'll talk about irrigation, starts for irrigation, influences on watering and all that. So we're kind of leading up to irrigation. All right, cool. Yeah, short, sweet, to the point.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, guys. Chat sometime later this week.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks, Matt. Have a good day.
Yeah.
I guess I had one random question just
Yeah, I can.
in my head. So would you ever typically have like multiple bird boxes set up in a zone to get an average then, if it was large, or?
Yeah, you definitely can. Absolutely. You would have one. So if we had one large open area, you would have one set up every. There is a specific set distance.
Like range? Okay.
Like every 5 zones, you would have one bird box set up.
Okay.
Even within a specific range, you can have a couple of sensors set up. You should actually have a sensor set up above the screens and a sensor set below the screens, right? So you have different humidity levels, you have different temperatures, and you can affect your climate differently based on those sensors, right? You can have airflow changes regarding, I gotta say, so if we have different climates above the curtain and different climates below the curtain, right? We can use those different climates to our advantage if we have sensors that tell us what those climates are. Um,
I assume for like doing dips and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, and dehumidifying and using
Right.
the curtains to your advantage rather than using them to a disadvantage, right? So you can, as at night, for instance, if you're covering your crop and you feel that your humidity is building, you don't really know what your humidity levels are above the curtains, right? So you really don't know what airflow, the direction of your airflow is if you don't have a sensor above that. You can make some assumptions, right? If it's wintertime, you're making a huge assumption, and not a huge assumption, you're making a pretty valid assumption that the air above the curtain is a hell of a lot colder than the air below it, right? So you're always going to have air movement through the curtain, regardless of the makeup of that curtain. It is porous to some degree. So I guess if you had a sensor above the curtain, you would understand that airflow a little more, right? Um, and also having that sensor above the curtain would allow you to control the vents based on the sensors that are above the curtain versus below. So again, if your humidity level is rising from below the curtain, um, you can, and the temperature is starting to regulate above that curtain, right? So say your lights are on and we're getting some radiation occurring above the curtain, and that pocket of air now is starting to warm up. So we're going to get less airflow through the curtain as the temperatures equalize, right? Um, so if we had a sensor above that curtain, then we can open the vent to cool that pocket down a little bit again, and then we can have a cause of more airflow going through the curtain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It's just more sensors, more information, more control.
Exactly. Yeah, the
Yeah.
more sensors you have, the greater the data, and the more understanding you'll have in your what your greenhouse is doing. Right? You can have too many, I guess, in the fact that you only want your equipment to make decisions based on, like, for consistency, to be based on the same pieces of sensing equipment, right? You don't want your vents operating off of 5 different sensors because they'd be going crazy. So you have to pick a specific sensor in order for it to be consistent throughout the greenhouse.
All
Anyway,
right, that makes sense.
again, a long-winded answer to your question. All good? Graham. We can, if you have any questions specifically, if you're in class this week, we can chat then. Yeah, perfect. Graham, even if you've got some time, I can bring you into the office and we can have a little chit chat. We'll chat then. See you guys.